We are joined on stage. We're lucky and very happy that Lamisi could join us. I think Lamisi might be the most busy person I've ever met. And that's because, if you want something done, you give it to the most busy person in the room. So unfortunately, she is busy, but very happy that you could come today. Lamisi joins us from DNB, where you are running the engineering performance group. Productivity, I was so close. But maybe you want to say a few words about yourself and what you're doing at DNB and how that's going.
Yeah, thank you for having me and inviting me to this session. Super excited to learn more or hear more about the stories that have been presented so far. And correctly, as you said, my name is Lamisi, and I'm the head of engineering productivity in DNB. And the main responsible for the DevOps tool sets on the various platforms, also the IT responsible and owner of the SDLC process. So, yeah, pleasure to be here.
So just on that subject, I mentioned the DevOps control framework during my session, but I'm getting curious about, tell the story of your SDLC, where it started, how it's going. You have an awful lot of things going on at DNB. Is it one? Is it multiple? Is it a la carte? Is it a fixed menu? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things. I think it's worth bringing in the context. I joined this particular unit as the service owner approximately 2 years ago. And one of the important or key changes that DNB did at the time was changing delivery models. Up until 2019, it was primarily project-based, and it was pivoted into more stable teams, autonomous teams, DevOps model. And one of the first things that we needed to look at was the compliance documentation and how do we describe the things that we do and how do we deliver software. So primarily it was based on a typical kind of PMP project-based way where 50 different roles, bunch of handovers and approvals and those kind of things. So those were one of the things that needed to change. And it was also, the sort of philosophy and mindset around DevOps. How do we actually want our engineering teams to change the way they're working? How can we sort of inform and enlighten them on how you should sort of, what does your everyday look like compared to from being a strict developer, throwing the software over to some testers throwing it over to someone else, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many, I would say, stakes or many angles that this needs to be looked at when it comes to the culture, the mindset, and understanding what it means to own software end to end. So trying to sort of map that also with the cultural needs of the organization, but also looking into the compliance bit. What do we actually need to comply with? And where and how do we describe that? So super grateful for the conversation and the workshop that I invited Mike and James through Merkley DB and later Cosley to sort of have a lot of those conversations, the mindsets, the thinking, and how do we actually try to make a difference in an incumbent bank that has been around for a long time with a lot of history, and sort of improve the world of the engineers. If you take the engineering perspective, how should the world look like, and how can we help the engineers to perform? So the work is obviously ongoing. That is not something that is changed overnight. At the same time, I'm responsible for the tool sets. So how do we really bridge that gap from the legal requirements, the external, the internal requirements, and how do we look that into the tools that we're using? Trying to let the tools drive a lot of this, and it's ongoing.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just want to remind folks that we do have the Slido still open, so if you have any questions for the panel, please go ahead and submit them there. I'll be keeping half an eye on what's going on here. I'm just kind of, we had a question earlier in the day, which was about the continued existence of a CAB in a multi-vendor environment. I think that's quite an interesting question. Maybe, Dips, you've got a lot of experience dealing with vendors. How does CAB and change management work when you kind of got third parties delivering parts of your system? You've got outsourced partners that are helping develop your product. Again, it goes back to the trust a little bit, but also like the bridging and what does that look like?
Yeah, typically what I've seen is where you have got multi-vendor environments, you have a centralized CAB, right? So at the end of the day, you look at different changes coming together and potentially going out within a very small window. It's very hard to track down and identify if something breaks maybe a few days after a release, who was the actual party responsible. It's quite complex because if you have an architecture where different teams are working together, it's quite often that two different teams might actually end up changing the same code, right? So I think as CABs, as a concept, I would actually pare it down and look at what is it trying to achieve. It's trying to achieve the fact that everyone has visibility of change, right? Management have an accountability to stakeholders, investors, everyone in the board to make sure that whatever goes out is representative of the brand, works for the customers, delivers the value that the business want. So, and towards that end, CAB has a very important role that it's looking to play in making sure all the changes have gone through the right testing, so it's verifiable and manage that process well. And then at the same time, it's also about coordinating across different teams and functions.
So, but how has that evolved over time, the coordination problem? That doesn't go away, even if you go to DevOps, you eliminate the CAB. What does that get replaced with?
So I think what I'm seeing more of are organizations moving towards still having a lightweight CAB, which looks at a prepared report, and that kind of has a red, amber, green model, where you look at green are like all tests, everything has gone through, has been verified, yeah, tick done, go out, right? Red is like something has failed, send it back, no further discussion required. Right? It's the amber, and as organizations mature, the amber part of the band gets smaller and smaller, right? So that's where you need a further discussion. Somebody needs to look into specific areas, and you can't potentially come up with something that works 100% of the time. But organizations are getting more and more better at identifying these and figuring out what to do in these instances.
Interesting.
Just to build on what Dips is saying there, there's different ways of looking at it as well in terms of what you're fed up into. You can look at it as a job role, or you can look at it as a responsibility that you need to actually carry out during the life cycle of your change. So we started out by having kind of, every 2 weeks having people come together, approve the release, that's what's going on. But more and more we factor in what John was talking about in his bottom right, which is that distributed trust. So is that how can you actually align and make sure people understand the why, what are you trying to achieve? And then for each individual change, the people that own it, responsible for it, have that distributed trust. Because a CAB, it's, what is it trying to achieve? It's making sure that changes are safe, it's been through the right processes, the things are tested. It doesn't mean that there's a group of people that have to do it. It could be distributed sets of people or just spun up as and when you need it, much like an easy container in terms of how that needs to work. It's the different ways you can think about doing it, but ensuring that you can demonstrate that you've got the controls of what it was there for. It's an interesting way of looking at it going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's quite interesting. I remember having very similar conversations like 5 years ago with different people about code review and pull requests. So a lot of, in regulated environments, often there's no real getting around like having code review. You need to have, it's the only way to mitigate insider threats when it comes to actual behavior changes to your systems. That's fine, but not everyone's in a regulated environment, but they still believe that the only way to share knowledge and to keep eyes on the code is to do pull requests, Whereas a lot of this stuff can be asynchronous. It can be checked afterwards. Like, it doesn't have to be a block in the value stream, as long as you have a process that you pick it up afterwards, or however. So it's kind of, I'm a big fan of like this trust but verify wherever you can do it. Like, there's a lot of systems that don't need CAB. There's a lot of systems that are quite independent and have low risk changes and so on. As long as you've got good eyes on it and that you periodically verify that everyone's doing what they should do. But I mean, I know that's not the case maybe when you're creating like code that changes transactions or payments or anything like this, but there's a lot of systems that are not like that.
Why not?
Well, it's a good question. I think that would be a question for the auditors in the audience.
Yeah.
But I mean, like peer review, like for me, the reason why peer review or 4 eyes or however you want to say it is essential as a synchronous process when you're dealing with transaction data, is that even if it's just a mistake, but say it's a bad actor, a mistake, either of these things can change the behavior of where money goes. And like a great way to mitigate that is, make sure someone else sees it. Like then someone else has at least had like some kind of verification on it. Now, the way we do software development in our company is we do ensemble programming. So it's almost never that people work on their own in our system. So like for us, like I think it'd be better to be able to sign the commit from 2 people and push it and not have any review process. If you could do that, like why not just pair? Then there's no block, the knowledge sharing happens, and at least if there is insider actors behaving badly, then well, they have to be collaborating as well when you've got a bigger problem.
I just wanted to add to some of the points there when it comes to the CAB, and I think an important discussion also to have in addition to the why is also the how. Is it really effectful? Because if your CAB looks like a round table of people who are not really that well versed in technology, if it ends up being checking the form or Excel spreadsheet, has the team ticked off the right buttons? Do we really have the control or understanding of the inside of what the change is actually affecting? And then, what is the purpose of the CAB if, is a CAB meeting, the board is overwhelmed with 100 new changes and quickly has to go through Excel spreadsheets just to mark that, yes, it's ticked off in the right boxes, but does it really solve the actual intent and the problem space, which we believe that the CAB was there to help prevent it to begin with?
We did have a question from the audience, another anonymous troll, directed towards Stack, and the question was, what set you on your ISO journey in the first place? Why did you decide to? It sounds like, I mean, to the somebody not in the space, it sounds like a lot of effort.
Yeah, I actually had it in my notes, but I skipped that part. But we don't really have to do the ISO, but we came to a part of our we came to size and customers who started to call were at a certain size, and it was a way for us to kind of build trust, and also it helps a lot in RFPs and stuff. There's a whole lot of stress surrounding that.
We have to do it anyway, right? Yeah. So one of the reasons that I think it's a good thing for us to get an ISO is that every time we, as Espen said, get an RFP, we have to answer like a lot of questions. And if we don't say, yes, we have an ISO 27001, then we have to fill out a lot more.
Yeah.
So it's just like you do it once, it's painful, but you get through it, and then you can say yes to 250,000 questions at once.
Yeah, and retroactively, it kind of was an exercise in tightening some of our processes. We did make a higher level change management process that each of the companies and teams had to adhere to, but they have their own processes and adhere to that in different ways. But but yeah, it kind of forced us into being in delivering even better quality across the board.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things. I see it. I mean, I see a lot of companies in your space as well, like go through this process and like you know, there's no such thing as a crisis. It's just like, you know, the end of an illusion. So like when teams are told, oh, we're you know, management or someone has decided we're going to do this thing, and it's like, oh, and then you know, you read the standard and you think, oh my goodness, this is, and then you say, can we even do this in a year? And you think, what else? I'm supposed to. This isn't my job, right? ISO 27001 isn't why I was hired. I've actually got product to deliver.
Yeah,
but then, like, as you go through the process, you think, okay, well, actually, this is improving our ways. Like, okay, we've got structure now. We know why we're doing things. And, okay, there's some growing pains, but I guess the developers now don't really notice much difference, right?
No, not at all.
And actually, we were doing most of this already. We just weren't documenting it. That's the big difference between before and after.
We couldn't prove it. We thought we were doing good, but we couldn't like prove it in an audit type of situation, right? So that kind of forced us into thinking a bit different and also. Kind of standardizing some things across, and again, Korsli was one of the key things that is going to be company-wide. Although the processes are a bit different and tooling is different. Yeah.
Mm. And let me see, at DNB, you've had well, you're going on a journey as well. I mean, I guess you're seeing some unexpected, like. You go through this kind of you go through the expectations, the trough of disillusion, and then some of these things plateau over time. I mean, how is it? Where are you on the hype cycle for the journey?
Well, you know, when you're all enthusiastic and they're going in, you know, saying you have your vision that yes, we're going there, right? And you now start to face some of probably the uphill battles, or not everybody's buying into the vision, or maybe potentially also failed into explaining some of the details properly so that people could see what you were seeing and those kind of things. And I think, you know, that is I believe the textbook model of any transformation is really and truly a form of uphill kind of battle, trying to convince the right people that this probably is a better way of doing things. But at the same time, you know, the organization is open to learning, but at the same time, you're battling this, you know, are we all looking at the same vision here? And one of the things that we're doing is trying to demonstrate value rather than trying to convince everybody in a meeting and having everybody, you know, giving a thumbs up around certain things. Through this here from DNB as well, where we, you know, looking for those teams, or let's say the innovators. If you follow the classical curve of, you know, who are sort of interested and open to experiment, trying to demonstrate value locally, and then showing that, oh, this is a better way, or this is potentially another way of solving a particular problem. So, you know, we started off drafting of a new SDLC, trying to incorporate some of the DevOps principles and those kind of things. But we are a huge bank, and we have everything from the mainframe to the cloud, 2 different clouds. You know, we're everywhere. We have every technology running in the bank, literally. So, I mean, it's a huge undertaking trying to transform the entire bank at the same time. So you had to be realistic that, no, you can't probably do that. And some people are probably not willing either to change, because this is how I've been doing it for the past 30 years. This is what I know. And I'm not really, you know, looking to change. I'm comfortable here. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, there are all kind of dynamics, but we're trying, you know, there's an exercise between, you know, being compliant according to the legal aspect of things, and the drive also to mature the organization, if you will, around certain principles. So trying to find that happy medium where you are able to at least comply on a bare minimum, I would say, that everybody can, while on the, let's say, through maybe other means, trying to mature and advance the thinking in the organization. So I haven't found the perfect recipe yet, but I'm recognizing that this is a part of the journey. So, yep.
It's funny. I'm reminded when you say that story, so before starting this company, I worked as a DevOps consultant, and the consulting engagement that really got me convinced that this was something to do was I was asked to come by a CTO at a bank in Australia to come down and help them with their kind of DevOps transformation. They were building an engineering practices team. They got the best architects and technologists from within the company, and they formed them into like a consulting team almost that would go in and help kind of bring these teams with them into like the future they wanted. So I was going in to train them how to do things like value stream mapping, set up a process, get a branching strategy in place, figure out how to automate your deployment, all that stuff. So I mapped it all out. They went from 6-month releases to 6-week releases by the time I'd got there. But, at their 6-week kind of release cadence, half of that was release. It was like cutting a branch, getting a slot in the change advisory board, which needed 10 days advance notice to show up to. You need to fill out their long SharePoint form, which had information you already had in all your other DevOps systems. You went there, and then I sat in one of the cabs. It was fascinating. It was like a big cab. There was 4 people in the IT change board. That was a full-time job in the bank, was to sit and run this process. And then every program lead would come in and say, "Please, can I make my change?" And then afterwards, I spoke to the IT change manager, the head of the group, and he said, "Yeah, so I mean, we're here basically to make sure that everyone talks to each other." And I was like, "That's not what happened. Everybody spoke to the cab and said, 'Please, can I make my change?' And then they went home." And I was like, "Okay, this is the cab doesn't know anything about your software." And then, okay, you get your check off from the cab, and then you put something in the change calendar, which was another new thing I'd never heard of. Like, okay, in a week, we're going to deploy this, and we're going to bring developers, testers. We're going to have a network engineer who can change the F5 configuration. It was incredible. I was like, okay, this is definitely something to do there. That same CTO that brought me into that gig, I had a chat with him this morning. He's now a CTO at another bank in the Middle East. And he said, "It's amazing. What took us 10 years to start adopting the cloud and so on, we've done in a year at this bank, just because, the world has moved on. And what's changed isn't the technology, right? It's all about mindset and culture and the status quo. Everyone around has changed, and then it's like, okay, we have to do this." And it's like, when you tell your story, it's like, you already know what has to happen, but the challenge is everybody else. It's like the boiling frog problem. Like, you have to wait and say, okay, before we get cooked, maybe we should figure this out. All right, that was my story time. But there was another good question here, maybe for Dips or Alex. So I don't know who asked this, but it's a good question. Like, why do so few companies? Why do you think so few companies are trying to solve for continuous compliance? Why is it like? Why is there no other tools in the space? Why is it not something like it's starting to be talked about at the DevOps Enterprise Summit? It's like it's not really kind of bubbling up yet, but we know it's such a big problem.
It's an incredibly hard problem to solve because it's not as much about the tech; it's about the mindset, right? You're competing against an establishment which has existing systems, policies, processes, frameworks, everything defined, all in hundreds of thousands of Excel spreadsheets across the world. That's what you are disrupting here. So it's a hard challenge.
You're picking the wrong fight.
I would also say that practices follow technology, but it's way behind, right? So you've had this huge technological shift from these old ways of doing stuff to DevOps, but again, the practices around that are just kind of running behind. So I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I kind of follow that up as well and saying if I think back to when I was at a bank, a lot of the changes were point and click changes. You do it on a system. It's a lot of manual effort. So if I can imagine putting Cozily into that kind of system, it's a bit more difficult to think of how you'd actually do that. But now that you've actually got infrastructure as code or code being deployed and different pipelines going through, it's a lot simpler to have an API call out or a command line interface call out to these systems. And then that enables you to have that compliance as code to kind of go through it. And so people have seen there's a gap in the market that we can take advantage of where we're going to. At least that's kind of why I think it might have been a bit more difficult and why you've kind of got in there quite early on.
And I think it's also where you'd see that people think of it as a black and white, where you either have full continuous compliance happening all the time, or you have full manual processes. There can be lots of gray in between, right? And lots of shades of gray. One example that comes to mind is around risk assessment. Now, you have got an ability to identify what the changes are, what are being deployed, but from there, can you calculate what is the commercial risk associated with that change, or the financial risk associated with that change? Because it could be an infrastructure change being deployed, one microservice, something on the mobile app. It's incredibly hard to boil it down to a form where you have got someone like the CFO who's responsible or accountable for assessing and approving a change based on the financial risk. And they're like, well, what is the financial risk of this change? And none of the SHA will tell me that, right? So
it's interesting. I'm kind of curious as well. Like a lot of places we talk, they've got they don't have a process like for all they have a process, but if you look at individual teams, they've got very different ways of working. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, you want teams to build the culture and have a strong ownership. And also what's from a risk perspective is that they have very, very different risks. Like if you're like the PSD2 API for the bank, these days, the regulators are pretty interested if you're up or down, because it's like, okay, we're past the point where you can't you can half do PSD2 because, again, you're playing an important role in the industry. So it's like, okay, but there's other parts of your systems that are in development, are internal tools. They've still got risks associated, but they're different and they have different requirements.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to a very interesting perspective there when it comes to the relevance of tech in the society. Mainframe systems have been running for 50 years, but back in the day, you used to go inside into a back office, process whatever you have to, and there were systems running, but they were not as customer-facing or so, they were important, yes, but not so crucial for the running of a society. Technology is now, without technology, you basically, you will struggle to run a society without the technology. And I also think, we're sort of meeting or bridging the gap, between some of the engineering best practices, I believe, and engaging engineers into thinking in legal terms or compliance terms. These are, the boundaries or the walls, as we have heard before as well, are slowly, being built as well, where the one and the same engineer is solving the business problem, but also the legal problem, but also the compliance problem from the position that the engineer is in. So, I mean, from people were doing Agile or doing DevOps before there were DevOps tools per se, right down from the Jira tickets, from Post-it notes. They were probably not called Jira tickets at the time because we were no Jira system, but we had Post-it notes, how to organize our work. And from Hudson or Jenkins and those type of systems. Now we're sort of using the tools that we have and bridging that into the legal aspect and saying, yes, we have this information, we have this data. How can we make it useful in this context?
Isn't that a problem? I mean, this is a question for everyone. I think that I totally agree with everything you said, but I'm also kind of aware that we're asking an awful lot from developers these days. Like, you know, they should be good at coding. Like, that's the table stakes. But then, yeah, it'd be great if they were really good at TDD as well, because we want their code to actually work. And yeah, I mean, we're in a bank, so they also have to be security champions. So they have to go on security training and know how to write secure code and care about their dependencies. And, you know, they should own their pipelines, right? I mean, who else is going to own their pipelines? This is their delivery mechanism, of course. And, you know, and it goes on. And then we say, okay, that's just the technical stuff. Then they've got a domain to deal with. Like, what should this code actually do? Do I need to talk to legal? Am I going to become a whistleblower in a case I don't know about? You know, it's like, I mean, there's like, from a cognitive load perspective, how is it to be like, how is it even possible to be a developer in a regulated industry?
Abstractions, I guess, like platforms. I know you like those. Yes.
Ensemble, yeah. I mean, collaboration is definitely one thing, but I mean, if you have a look at job adverts these days for developers, I mean, people talk about, you know, how like the salary expectations are growing, but I mean, look at the expectations on the other side of the card as well. It's like there is a kind of a...
Yeah. They are the new unicorns, right?
Yeah.
That's the mythical creature, like, and it's quite rare to find someone with everything. One thing that I've seen work quite well is to see where there is willingness from the developers to pick up additional areas and have an open conversation around which areas they need help with. Mm. So, for instance, if they can't get around the security side of things, it's about adding someone to the team who can take care of those responsibilities, but over a period of time, get them to understand and grow in that respect, right? Different people always bring different skills and experience, and I don't think it would be fair to expect someone to know everything of everything. Like, that's nobody does that, right? So it's probably, and that's how I have looked at solving it, is by adding to the team to provide those skills in the short term, and then finding champions who can then grow and raise the bar across different areas.
Yeah, so the way we've looked at it, the way you actually see it more in the market is you'll see a lot more almost DevX roles for developer experience. Yeah. There's more teams spinning up around that, looking at, again, I mentioned it in mine, it's that empowerment thing in terms of, yes, you're piling all these things on, but then it's how does that scale to make sure that then, because alignment isn't always there, or if they're too dug deep in the processes, do they actually understand the why behind what they're building and then lose actual sight of the product they're going? Mm. So actually what you're seeing more and more is a lot more DevX roles coming up, where you have got platform teams which look after the underlying infrastructure, pipelines, etc., to make it easy. But DevX actually looking at how a developer interacts with that, and it's the collaboration between the two is, I think, trying to solve this problem because of the higher and higher demands that we're putting on our developers in a regulated environment. Yeah.
So I think a combination of those two things is exactly what the answer is. Basically creating like the abstractions through platforms and having DevX make sure that the developers understand it, but then also maybe looking at not looking at individual developers that should know everything, but teams that together know everything that they need to worry about. I think that's basically the answer.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, but I think that's a great note to wrap up on. I think I want to thank everyone for their collaboration tonight. The talks have been excellent. Lamisi, you will give a talk for me one day. But it's been this. So thank you all. It's really special to have you come and tell your stories. And I want to thank everyone in the audience that came today. It's great that there's people actually interested in this thing that James and I started all these years ago. It wasn't always that people would come and listen to us talk about this stuff. So it's fun, and I hope we can do it again next year. So. Let's, if you would all pretend to have a drink of water, that would help us wrap this up. Great.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, guys.